Welcome to Ballot Battleground, Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. It must be an election year because Biden administration officials are making the rounds. Biden himself came last month, but this week, two members of President Joe Biden's cabinet are in northern Nevada, and we had the special opportunity to sit down with them. The U.S. Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, and the U.S. Acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su, were at the News 4 studios, complete with their Secret Service details. I got about 10 minutes to lob questions about the rocky new FAFSA form rollout, student loans, unemployment, and more. And do stick around after that interview. We've got another great guest, April Corbin Girnus with the Nevada Current. She joins the pod to preview the critically important Nevada legislative elections that will determine if Democrats expand their supermajorities in Carson City or if Republicans can win back some power. But first, our interview with the Secretary of Education and Acting Secretary of Labor. I'm so pleased to be joined now with Secretary Miguel Cardona of the Department of Education and Acting Secretary Julie Su of the Department of Labor. Thank you guys both for being here and coming to our station. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. We'll start with you, Secretary Cardona, because there's a pressing issue affecting potentially millions of families in the U.S. that has to deal with FAFSA. There's a new form, and I think that was, a good thing, to have this form, but the rollout has been rocky and bumpy, and the IRS tax data that's been transferred over, there's some glitches with that. What can you say about the latest on trying to fix this glitch so that families have enough information to decide where to send their kid to school in the fall?
Absolutely. Look, that's the biggest priority we have. I've been on calls this morning, making sure that we're on schedule to deliver for those schools. Ultimately, for the students, I too have a senior in high school, and I know how important this is for families across the country. As you mentioned, we redesigned the whole thing. We expect 600,000 more students to have access to federal dollars. So at the end of the day, it's going to be great for students. We're working on the issues of the delays this week, and we're hoping that we can continue to push it. Over 6.5 million people have signed up for FAFSA. And my message to students is fill it out if you haven't yet, studentaid.gov. In Nevada, only 46% of high school seniors last year filled it out. That's unacceptable. We have to do better. I want that number closer to 90%. It's a faster form. Students have to fill out the forms. We're going to do our job to make sure the schools have what they need and get those letters out so we can have more students going to college. And the president's been pushing to increase Pell Grants, so there should be more dollars for more students.
When do you anticipate this glitch being totally resolved? Because families are kind of waiting in limbo right now. And also, how many students and families affected by this? I saw latest from your department was maybe about 1 million families.
Yeah, about 1 million, a little under 1 million. We expect it this week. We're communicating with colleges daily, and they're ready. We're working with our technical vendors to make sure that the information moves as quickly as possible. We need our students to get those letters to make that decision to go to school and achieve their dreams.
And that has to deal with federal aid for students. But what about the students that are taking out loans and debt to pay for college? It's been a priority of the Biden administration to relieve a lot of those student loans. Many people disagree with that, saying, why should I, as someone who did not take out loans, pay for the loans that someone else chose to take out?
Yeah, well, look, I look at it, I make it analogous to small businesses that we supported during the pandemic. We kept them on their feet. We want to keep Americans on their feet. Student loans have gotten out of control in this country. The system is broken. The president had the courage to say we're going to fix it, and I'm really proud of what we've done. $139 billion in student debt relief to about 4 million Americans. And this is really a lifeline. We're preventing defaults. This helps the local economy. And we're also fixing a broken system. We've improved FAFSA. We're getting that done. We're holding colleges accountable for a better return on investment. You shouldn't be in a lifetime of debt, getting a degree that costs you $150,000 to get a job that pays $30,000. We need to do better. We're cracking down on that, and we're working with families to make sure that college is for all students, not just for some. And I'm excited to be here with my friend and colleague because we're working on different pathways to higher education too. It's not just a 4-year college. It's also the 2-year college where you get a credential and you get a high skill, high paying career, which is why we're excited to be here in Nevada.
Yeah. Acting Secretary Sue, again, thank you for being here. Jobs numbers are expected to come out this Friday. The recent numbers showed that employment is still the second highest unemployment rate here in the state of Nevada at 5.2%. Still, that's pretty low. Are you guys pleased with those numbers or?
Yeah, I mean, look at where we've come, right? Just 3 years ago, when the president first came into office, the unemployment rate across the country and right here in Nevada was sky high. Since then, we've had 15 million jobs created in this country, record low levels of unemployment for the longest stretch of time, and high labor force participation rate, meaning people have come back into the labor market following the pandemic and are looking for jobs and finding jobs. This did not happen by accident. Many people actually said it was not possible to happen this quickly, but don't ever bet against President Biden. He had an economic policy, he had a vision, and has put it into practice. And now we're seeing these kinds of results. And part of it is, what my friend Miguel, Secretary Cardona just said, which is that, we're investing in jobs, in industries. We're making investments right here in Nevada to build batteries to help power our electric vehicle future. We're supporting teachers. We're here to celebrate the fact that, teachers won a historic contract. And that's part of a nationwide trend where workers are winning at the bargaining table, from Hollywood to healthcare to hospitality, obviously teachers, auto workers, delivery drivers. And it's not a coincidence that these victories are happening at the same time that we have the most pro-worker, pro-union president in history sitting in the White House.
What would you say, though, to Nevadans who, with the unemployment rate being relatively low, do have a job but are still struggling to make ends meet with the high cost of housing, and although inflation is tapered off, costs still remaining high?
Right. That's why I think this idea of a job having to be a good job, a job where you not only have decent pay, where you can raise a family, you have benefits, so you can go to the doctor when you or your children are sick, you have retirement, so you have security at the end of your career, but you also have dignity and respect. You have opportunity, upward mobility. All these things are part of what we believe is a good job, and that's important. And so now our investments are really about making sure that the jobs that we create, to rebuild our infrastructure is not just about good roads and bridges. It's not just about clean drinking water coming out of every faucet. It's not just about high-speed, reliable internet in every home. All those are part of the president's Investing in America agenda, but it's also the fact that those are going to be good jobs that help to lift families out of poverty and give them a piece of the American dream.
Yeah. Nevada's minimum wage is increasing to $12 an hour this summer in July. The lower end of the spectrum, the federal minimum wage still at $7.25. California, our neighboring state, is at $20 an hour. Is the federal minimum wage too low at $7.25? On the flip side, are you worried about California and some states that are kind of on the opposite end of that spectrum, and whether or not that could pinch small businesses?
So the president has been very clear that the $7.25 an hour minimum wage is too low. If you think about that for a full-time worker, that's about $15,000 a year. And, we need to do better. This is what Secretary Cardona said, right? We want jobs to actually allow people not just to get by, but to have what the president calls breathing room. And so he's called for an increase in that minimum wage. Meanwhile, states and even cities have seen that, the need to raise wages, both to protect workers and working families, but also because it's a matter of making a strong economy, right? When workers have enough to actually spend in their communities, that's good for everybody. In California, I know, has long led the way in terms of worker protections. The $20 is for workers in one particular industry, right? In fast food. But I think what we're seeing is a trend across the country, including for workers who are bargaining themselves, of record wage increases. And that is very much part and parcel of Bidenomics, the idea that we want to make sure that workers get their fair share in this economy.
Before we wrap up, you were just on the ground in Baltimore at the site of the devastating bridge collapse there. You were talking to workers. What's the latest on efforts to kind of create pathways for ships in that area, as well as for the workers affected by this?
So President Biden has been very clear. We are moving heaven and earth to make sure that we clear out the wreckage, that we support the communities that have been affected. I did meet with workers who are feeling understandably really anxious about, when will the port reopen to full capacity? When will what's going to happen to their jobs? And so we're making sure that we are focused on those workers, the families of the workers who tragically lost their lives, right? These were Latino workers who do sometimes, the most backbreaking work. They were working in the middle of the night. They were, too often invisible, literally and figuratively. We need to do better, and we are, and as well as the workers who want to get back to work. And so we need to open that and rebuild in the most in the fastest and most responsible way that we can.
Last question for both of you guys before we wrap. You're both part of President Biden's cabinet. Polls show that a lot of voters are, one, worried about his age or worried about other things, especially younger voters, things like his policy having to deal with the war in Gaza. What's your message to voters who, as you guys tell us, what you guys say are accomplishments of the Biden administration, people who might not be feeling that, might not be supporting the president?
Look, I'd rather have a president that's 80 years old and is getting things done than a president with 91 convictions and is trying to divide our country.
Well,
That's
not
the bottom
convictions.
line.
I'll step, not convictions.
I'm sorry, indictments. Indictments. And for me, look at the track record. People talk about his age. Look at the ideals that he's putting forward. He's bringing forward climate strategies. He's talking about improving access to higher education. He's talking about fixing the infrastructure. These are the practices that we've delivered on in the last 3 years. And I know that the president, I can't speak about elections, but I know what this president is fighting for. And these are the things that are important to the American people.
Yeah, I mean, we see him up close all the time. I just talked to him yesterday. He is so deeply engaged. He's passionate about his vision for the country, and he's put together a team for, we feel very grateful to get to be a part of delivering on that vision. He called me on my way when I was going to Baltimore a few days ago because he cares so much about the impact of everything that we're doing on working people. He is dialed in. He is, making sure that we deliver, and it's truly a privilege to watch him work.
Absolutely.
Acting Secretary Sue, Secretary Cardona, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A special thanks to the secretaries for coming by our studio this week. It's an off year for Nevada's statewide office holders. The governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, treasurer, and controller, their terms aren't up until 2026. But as with every cycle, control of the statehouse is up for grabs in 2024. Every single seat in Nevada's 42-member assembly is up this election cycle, and there will be elections for 10 of Nevada's 21 Senate seats. The stakes are high. Democrats looking to get supermajorities in both chambers. Republicans looking to wrest back some control to stave off those supermajorities. And that's why this week we're bringing in April Corbin Girnus, the deputy editor of the Nevada Current, a nonprofit online news outlet. April just published 2 great stories going over the terrain and breaking down which races to watch, which won't be close, and which have been decided already. April, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Battleground Nevada. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so for folks who might not know, April is an award-winning journalist, the deputy editor of the Nevada Current, which if people aren't reading you guys, they should. A great nonpartisan news outlet. And I have to give you guys props and credit because you guys do a lot of stories looking into topics that are crucially important that often get overlooked, I think, by a lot of mainstream outlets and sometimes by TV and other outlets. So we always appreciate the work that you guys do at the Nevada Current.
Oh, thank you so much.
You are based in Las Vegas, right? But you spent some time up here in the odd years when the Nevada legislature is in session, and we've hung out in the press room with all the Nevada press corps. Do you prefer the legislative years when you get to come up and down to Carson City, or the election years when those are chaotic for their own reasons?
It's a lose-lose. No, it's great. I always it can be frustrating going up there, especially because I usually parachute up there at the end of the session when things are sort of the most hectic and it's a lot of work. But it's fun. I mean, I love covering state politics because it's so close to home in terms of these legislators are our neighbors, and you could really make an impact. So I love what I do. And I probably like the legislature more than election years, to be honest. But but maybe ask me that in November and I'll have a different answer because this year's kind of crazy.
Changes depending on which year it is. So that's a good segue into today's topic, which is the landscape of the Nevada legislative elections. For our listeners who might not know, let's just kind of go over how the legislature works for our listeners who maybe are engaging with politics for the first time, because it's it's the gang of 63, right? There's 63 of them in the two different houses, and just briefly go over how it's kind of broken down here in the Silver State.
Yeah, so our Nevada state legislature, like you just alluded to, meets every other year. That's unusual across the country, but that's how it works here. There are 63 total. There are 21 seats in the Senate, and they have 4-year terms, which means they're staggered 10 are up this year, and then in the next election cycle, there'll be 11 up in that year. And then there's 42 state assembly members. They have 2-year terms, which means all 42 of them are up this year.
And that's kind of the more direct democracy chamber where the whole House, the whole assembly can kind of flip over every 2 years, where voters can have a real instant impact on the process. And the Senate kind of mirrors, the U.S. Senate, right, with these longer terms. And for folks who might not know too, we'll say it's a citizen legislature, as you hint at, where these people, since the term is, or the session is only 5 or 6 months long, they have real jobs, full-time jobs, a lot of them professors, or lawyers, but sometimes dentists and plumbers, right? These are the people that are also working in our communities when they're not in Carson City.
Absolutely, yes. They're all, we have teachers, like you said, we have professors, we have K-12 teachers, there's a lot of lawyers, there's a fair amount of business people, there's a fair amount of people who are retired, just because those are the people who have the time to dedicate to that, especially given that 75% of the population is in Clark County and down south. They all have to travel up there. So it's a big ask to be like, hey, boss, can I take a few months off to go do this, even though it's an important thing? It's sort of unrealistic for a lot of people, which is a criticism that people have of the Nevada state legislature.
Yeah, definitely some drawbacks, and that could be a whole nother conversation for another day. But today's conversation is, as we said, the landscape of the legislative elections, because as you mentioned, all assembly seats are up and 10 of the Senate seats are up. Before we get into that, though, what's been kind of the recent history where Democrats have really controlled this process for the last 6 or 8 years, right? And they've kind of had majorities in both chambers?
Really, with the exception of this sort of like infamous red wave that happened in 2014, where a lot of Republicans came in and won a bunch of races unexpectedly and took control of the Nevada state legislature. The Nevada state legislature is largely controlled by Democrats, just the population of the state. But the issue that we pay attention to when we look at the Nevada legislature is the extent to which Democrats have control. So whether or not they have a 2/3 supermajority, or whether or not they just have a simple majority. That makes a really big difference in the Nevada state legislature, because for one, you have to, in order to raise revenue or change anything that involves revenue, basically raising taxes or changing anything that changes the tax structure, requires a 2/3 vote, which means that Democrats are not able to unilaterally raise taxes. They always need bipartisan support. And then the other issue is that if you have a 2/3 majority, you have the power to override any gubernatorial veto. That's what it takes. So right now, currently today, Democrats do not have supermajorities in both houses. They have the bare minimum of a supermajority in the assembly, and then they are one senator shy of it in the Senate. And so that's really the narrative we're going to hear throughout this election cycle when it comes to the state legislature, is whether or not the Republicans can break the assembly supermajority, flip a seat, and suddenly Democrats don't have a 2/3 majority in the assembly, and whether or not Democrats can hold the assembly and also flip one of those seats that are up in the Senate, in which case they would have 2/3 in both chambers, in which case, if that happens, they can override any veto that Governor Lombardo throws their way, which is a really big deal. And that's definitely the narrative we'll see.
Absolutely. Governor Lombardo vetoed, I believe, a record 65 bills.
75.
75, yes, 75 bills in the last session. Take me through the stakes, because obviously there were some major important policy bills for the Democrats that did end up getting rejected that you could see potentially being passed or, overriding his veto in 2025 if they were to win back the second supermajority.
Yeah, so like you said, Lombardo vetoed a record 75 in a single session. For context, because obviously we've had in the past Republican governors and a Democratic-controlled legislature. That's not new. The last time there was aside from Sisolak over the last few years, it was the 1990s was the last time we had a Democratic governor. So we've had that sort of split Carson City before. But just to give you a scope, the previous record was just under 50 vetoes. So this is a massive amount of vetoes. And they really are a wide range of things. I mean, Democrats came out during the last legislative session and passed 3 gun bills, like on day one, and sent those to the governor's office, and then he automatically vetoed them. It wasn't a surprise, but it kind of just set the tone, I think, for sort of Veto Fest 2023. But really, it's hard almost to characterize what Lombardo's vetoes were like because they were all over the place in terms of topic, right? We had I think 1/3 of them were healthcare bills. That's not surprising because there's a lot of healthcare bills that go through that, through the legislature. But there was that. There was, things like death with dignity, which it's called, and which was something that had been sort of working its way through the legislature over years and years and finally made it across the finish line in the legislature only to get vetoed. Like we said, they saw gun. There were several housing bills that people were really pushing. Basically anything. There was a lot of education stuff, and even the stuff that did pass through the legislature was heavily modified, heavily amended into something that negotiated into something that they knew the governor was going to sign. So it really does have a big effect on everything.
Yeah, and you could see the Democrats, if they were to win these double supermajorities in both chambers, passing a number of these bills through, expecting them to be vetoed. They would just come right back into the legislature for them to override that veto. So there is a ton on the line, and that's why these legislative elections in 2024 will be so critical for both sides. And it's why we wanted to bring you on this week, having just written 2 great pieces in the Nevada Current, doing yeoman's work, right? Going through every single race, let's see, how many races? 21 plus, over 30 different races to kind of take a look at. Some of them will be critically important. Some of them, the districts have been drawn so red or blue to where we kind of know the outcome going into it. So where did you start, and where should we start for this conversation? Assembly or Senate?
The Senate's easier to digest, so we can start with the Senate, which again, there's only 10 seats in there, but there's a lot of drama there. But so there's 10 races there. There are 2 districts out of those 10 that the primary decides the winner of the November election. That's because in Senate District 4, which is in North Las Vegas, down south, no Republican or third-party candidate filed. So the Democratic primary will decide that winner. And it's kind of an interesting primary race between Dina Neal, who's a longtime sort of elected official, and a higher ed regent, Laura Perkins, who's running. So that'll be interesting. And then longtime Senator Pete Goycochea in Senate District 19 is term limited, which means he can't run again. So there's a competitive, there'll be a Republican primary that will decide who does that seat because, again, there was no Democrat that filed in there. And then there's 2 districts here in Southern Nevada that are sort of interesting with the Democratic primary where you have an assemblywoman versus a regent and a culinary union member primarying a sitting senator, which is kind of interesting. Both of those are deep blue districts, so the outcome will likely be there. And I'm kind of breezing over them just because, that'll be very interesting for the people who were in Senate District 1 and Senate District 3. But the thing people tend to care the most about is what will flip the state as a whole, right? And so for that, Northern Nevada listeners will probably recognize State Senator Heidi Sievers-Gansert decided not to run for re-election in Senate District 15. That's one of the most competitive districts in the state. It was subject to political redistricting and gerrymandering that gives it the potential to be a red to blue flip. I think that's something that Democrats are definitely targeting this year. And you have 2 primaries that are pretty, that have a lot of candidates. You have Angie Taylor, who's an assemblywoman who's now running for that Senate seat. You have Reno council member Naomi Durr. Is that how you say her name?
Yeah, Naomi Durr.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, she's running. And then Johnny Kearns is the other candidate in that on the Democratic side. And then on the Republican primary, there's 3 Republicans also running for that. So that's a district that we may see a lot of action with. Southern Nevada's version of that is Senate District 18. That is a seat that's currently held, or was most recently held by a Republican, Scott Hammond, who is now in the Lombardo administration. He's sort of been down, stepped down, but there are 3 Republicans who are sort of strong candidates in that. There's an assemblyman, the Clark County fire chief is running in that, and then there's an entrepreneur who's got the backing of Hammond. So that'll be a really interesting race to watch. And then Senate District 5, currently State Senator Carrie Buck. She has a primary challenger. I don't think many people think that she will have a problem overcoming that, but she does have, but that general election race will be interesting to watch. There are 2 Democrats in there currently and we've seen that district in particular be pretty competitive in the past. So really it's District 5, District 15, and District 18, I think, is the one that have the most eyes on them.
Definitely. That's a great overview. Thank you. Those 3 districts, each one has the potential to be kind of the tipping point district, if you will, that could determine, to reiterate again, since it's so important, supermajority control potentially if the Democrats were to flip, say, Senate District 15, for example, up here in the north. So appreciate that overview. Let's switch over to the Assembly, where Democrats have the supermajority right now by the slimmest of margins, right? They don't have a seat to lose. If they were to lose 1 seat, they would just have a simple majority. And so not only do they need to flip 1 seat in the Senate side, they're also hoping to protect that supermajority in the Assembly, correct?
Correct. And just to give you a landscape, obviously when you say there are 42 races that are up in the Assembly, that seems like a lot, but it's sort of important to know that probably in that, there's probably 7 or 8 of those races are actually competitive between Republicans and Democrats in the general election. So there are actually 7 races that are totally uncontested, which means that the incumbent filed to run and then nobody, not their party or the opposite party, decided to challenge them. So maybe that's a good thing, that people think they're doing a good job, or maybe people just know that that's a hard hill to climb. But there are 10 open seats, which means those are races where there is no incumbent. We kind of tend to watch those because incumbents have a natural advantage, both in fundraising and just notoriety and experience and all of that. So it's a little harder to flip a seat that somebody's currently in. So out of those 10 seats, only 3 of them are competitive. And then there are 18 races where there's an incumbent running, but not in the primary because they have no primary challenger, but we'll see them in November. So that kind of gives you a landscape where if you're looking at your sample ballots that are going to be here in, like a month or so, and there's not an Assembly person, it may be because there's no primary challenger and you may see them later. But when it comes to Assembly races, I'll just highlight a few of them.
Sure.
The one most relevant probably to Northern Nevada would be Assembly District 25, which is Assemblywoman Selena LaRue Hatch. She is a Democrat who represents the district currently, and there's a Republican, Diana Sandy, I believe is how you say her name. She is going to be running that. That is a swing district. It's got a sort of split, pretty close registration advantage. That's how we determine competitiveness, if people aren't aware, is that people tend to look at the percentage of Democrats in the district versus Republicans. But obviously, there's a lot of people who are registered as nonpartisan in the state now, and that includes high numbers of people in all of these districts. So it's sort of a little bit of a guessing game in terms of what. So we may see a lot of action in that race AD 25. Another Assembly district to watch is Assembly District 4. That's in Southern Nevada, and has been historically competitive. And one thing that's interesting about AD4 is that Democrats didn't run anybody last cycle in that district. I don't know if somebody fell through or if they didn't play. There were no candidates who wanted to run, but the Republicans basically had a really easy walk into that district because there was no Democrat running. This time around, they do have a Democrat running, and that will be a potential flip on the Democrat from red to blue, which obviously would help their margins and give them sort of a more wiggle room to lose elsewhere or whatever. And that district also is an open seat, which means the incumbent is not running, which again helps probably Democrats in this case. And that's between Lisa Cole and Ryan Hampton. And then there's also AD 29 and 35. Those are also both in Southern Nevada, and those are open seats where Democrats have opted not to run. And again, potential blue to red flips on that side. As we mentioned, Earlier, Governor Lombardo has done a lot to publicize that he wants to protect that veto. There are a lot of assembly candidates are running on. There are a lot of assembly Republican candidates who are running on, we need to protect Governor Lombardo's veto. And I think we'll see that play out in that assembly race pretty heavily over the next few months.
That leads into my next question, which is, have you seen the governor or assembly Republicans kind of using that, veto messaging as opposed to maybe targeting their messaging on different policy proposals or what they would do to fix X issue and focusing more on protecting that supermajority? Or
yeah, we've seen a lot of that. I think Governor Lombardo has not been shy about the fact that one of his priorities is to protect his veto power. He really, during the last legislative session, the Nevada Republican Party sent out fundraising emails, sort of lovingly calling Lombardo Don Vito. And it's really like a sort of moniker and narrative that the governor's embraced, that he really needs to do that. And you're seeing that play out where he has been really, he's been, he's acknowledged that he's been proactive in trying to recruit strong candidates in all of these races, and he's helping with fundraising. There's a PAC that supports him that has sort of been really hands-on in trying to promote these people. They have, a lot of the Republicans we've seen in this cycle have announced their campaigns early, and they're strong. And I think you're seeing that sort of full force. The Republican Party seems very united in putting their candidates out there, seeming united. There's not a whole lot, there's a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of Republican on Republican fighting. They're really trying to be coordinated in a way that we haven't seen over the last few sessions. And I will say, anecdotally, being here in Southern Nevada, that I see a lot of campaign signs already popping up with big old letters saying endorsed by Governor Lombardo.
Really? Okay.
Yes, I know Carrie Buck and April Ardent, who she's a Senate candidate in a competitive district here. Both of them have billboards out that have the candidate and Lombardo. You would normally see a campaign and it's like them and their husband and their children and stuff. It's not that. It's the candidate and Governor Lombardo who, polling has shown people are, favoring him, and that they have, they tend to like him right now. And so I think they're really trying to capitalize that and bank on that. And you're seeing a lot of alliance with Lombardo on that.
Very interesting. Yeah, we haven't seen as many of the Nevada legislature campaign signs up here just yet, but surely now with
they're
candidate
coming.
filing having closed, yes, they will be coming soon. They'll be all over the place, and then we'll be sick of them before long. So, April, thank you so much for breaking this all down for us. 30 plus races to go through. I'm sure that took a very long time. So, on behalf of your readers and our listeners, we appreciate the work that you're doing to kind of make that confusing process a little bit simpler for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks again to April for coming on the pod this week. Before we wrap up, a clarification and some extra context to last week's episode explaining question 3 on open primaries and ranked choice voting. In our efforts to, as simply as possible, describe Nevada's closed primary system for partisan races, I didn't fully explain that Nevada does have open primaries already for nonpartisan races. For boards like city councils, school boards, and general improvement districts, this ballot measure would create open primaries for all races, including those partisan contests. Another thing we forgot to mention, candidates can actually win it all in the June primary. In certain down-ballot contests, candidates can win with 50% of the vote plus one, and they don't advance to the general election at all. Same with if only one party has candidates in a race, say 2 Republicans file but no Democrats, whoever wins in the June Republican primary wins that seat because they'll be unopposed in the general. That's another way these primaries, which are often low turnout, can determine our elected officials, often without a significant portion of the electorate, all those nonpartisan voters. Thanks to our previous guest, Sandra Cosgrove, for keeping us honest. We will do better next time. And with those caveats in mind, I still think it was a great episode, and we do hope you check it out. If you made it all the way to this especially long episode, I really appreciate it. As always, if you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, feel free to shoot us an email to my email, bjmargiott@sbgtv.com, with Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. And if you have a minute, I'd really appreciate it if you left a rating and a review. That helps the podcast show up higher in searches so more people can discover it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.